Today we have Danielle Evans with us on the show. Dani is an HR professional, MBA student, and money coach. She runs an Instagram account called at Dollars with Dani, where she helps educate people on subjects related to personal finance and money, as well as their careers and job searches. Dani, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I love how just straightforward your mission is.
Thank you.
We today we wanted to cover with you the topic of salary market research and negotiating. I think right now we're seeing some trends out in the world where the market is slowly starting to recover and pick up after the terrible effects of COVID. And we'd love to dig a little deeper into some of these topics to guide some of our listeners who might be looking for a career shift or change. But before we do like to ask our guests to tell us a little bit about their own personal money story. Do you mind doing that to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, so I studied economics in college. That was really my first exposure to like how money works, how market works, and that was also when I started to like nerd out about money. And all my friends would kind of make fun of me to be like reading my econ textbook and be like, "Guys, how cool is this?" And they're like, "It's not that cool." I'm like, "No, it's really cool." So that's when I really started getting interested in kind of all things money related. That's around the time that I started experimenting with my first budget. It wasn't great when I first started. And then when I graduated college, that's when I started having to manage my own money for the first time. And so I knew enough to know kind of the basics, but there was a lot of trial and error during that period. There was a lot of overspending. There was a lot of not understanding like how much apartment I should have in Boston for my salary, and Boston's expensive. So there was a lot of those kind of mistakes that I made along the way. But I was also very lucky that my dad is very financially literate. So he would give me lots of tips and advice along the way. And, he was like, open up a Roth IRA. And he kind of like guided me through those, first couple years where I was trying to figure it all out a little bit. And then as time went on, I just noticed a lot of my friends would come to me with all sorts of money related questions. And I just realized like this is such an important topic that's often seen as taboo. And I don't want it to be taboo. I think it's so important. I think people should talk about money and people can learn from one another and learn from each other's mistakes or learn from what someone else is going through and better their own situation, especially women. So that's really why I started Dollars with Dani, because I really wanted to provide that platform where we could talk about money and break down these complicated subjects in a way that's much more easy to understand so people can, better their financial situations.
I think we definitely share that sentiment. Definitely taking, just the fear and shame out of talking about it, but definitely making some of these conversations a little bit less taboo. And we'll nerd out here, so you're in a safe space.
But we also do it in a fun, approachable, like user-friendly
Yeah.
way, right? I think that's the key, right? Making sure that people don't feel afraid to ask what is a Roth IRA, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like half the barriers is not knowing what something might be. So makes sense.
Exactly. So, Dani, like Catherine said earlier, we really want to jump in and talk about some ways that you can do some salary market research. And, the last 2 months, we've started to see unemployment numbers go down, which means people are getting job offers, which is great. But we'd love your advice on how you recommend navigating the salary market research and negotiation part of getting an offer. So what are some of the contributing factors for market salary? Is it industry, location, experience?
Yeah, it's
Did
a
I get them all?
combination. Yeah, a combination of those things. So yeah, industry definitely plays a role. I think size of company plays a role. Location certainly plays a role. And then like your own personal experience and education. I think the other part that I think a lot of people don't realize is it also is based on just company like practices. So you like in HR, what we do is something called a salary survey, where basically you submit all of your company compensation data to a third party. They aggregate thousands of companies who do that, and then they spit out like market data, and that's what companies use to do their compensation planning. But what people don't realize is that companies have different philosophies for how they do that. Some companies say we want to pay in the 75th percentile of this range. Other companies say we want to pay in the 50th percentile, or we want to pay in the 25th percentile, but have fully paid for insurance or something like that. And so when you're thinking about market research or thinking about compensation, just seeing a number on one of these online websites isn't necessarily a perfect indicator for how a company approaches compensation, but it's certainly a helpful indicator to get you kind of in that range.
Awesome. And so blah, blah, blah. Let me figure out how I want to ask this. So how do you know if a company is in a particular range?
It's unfortunately not that transparent right now. Tech is probably the most transparent because there's some websites where there's really transparent compensation data. But in other industries, it's a little bit harder to know how a given company approaches compensation. So I think that's why just doing research to understand what you're worth. And maybe they say, look, we can't go that high. And then you can have other things to negotiate, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point later in this. But there are a lot of online resources that you can use to get a sense of how a company approaches compensation. And then the other thing is that I think people don't leverage the recruiters they're talking to enough to get a sense of how the company is envisioning compensation. So like if I'm interviewing for a role and the recruiter asks what my expectations are, and I say $80,000 for something, and he or she's response is, oh, that's like, no problem. Maybe I think I could have gone a little higher, right? And then that's still not the offer stage, right? Like that's just early on. So now in my mind, I'm like, oh, that was too easy. They probably have more money to give. Versus if they're like, oh, it's a little high for us. It's at the top of our range, but we could probably make it work. Then you're probably in the right spot. So I think understanding the recruiter's reactions, and if you take that kind of on the aggregate, that can help give you a sense too of maybe how that industry or that company approaches compensation.
So Dani, you mentioned, and that's a great point. You mentioned that obviously the dollar amount that you might find on some of these websites may not paint the full picture for people. And I'm definitely guilty of like completely ruling out jobs, even if they sound nice or, whatever it might be when I'm looking online and scrolling through LinkedIn jobs or whatever, that if it's not even close to my pay, I'm just not even considering it. But you've made me think, well, maybe they would have, I don't know, 100% healthcare coverage because they're actually a biotech or something. And therefore, my take home would maybe look the same, even though it's $20,000 less than what I'm on today. Because fun fact, healthcare is like so expensive,
Yeah.
even when you have coverage from your company. So what resources do you recommend for finding market salary? And do you for example, would you take say you saw a job listed on LinkedIn, would you then take it and create 3 different scores, or 3 different numbers and try to amalgamate them and find an average between them? How do you go about doing that to both verify and find out what that number means and how much more you might be able to negotiate even in non-financial components or elements?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I did a recent video about this too. So it's very top of mind for me.
Oh, cool.
But there's a lot of different websites out there. I think a lot of times people default to your LinkedIn salaries or your Glassdoor. And I actually find those to be the least reliable. And if you kind of dig into it, it's all self-reported data and they do no vetting. So all they do is just aggregate the self-reported information. And as we know from other things like survey responses and things like that, people tend to respond if they're particularly happy or particularly upset. So the data is typically a little bit skewed, but there is good searching features through those. You can filter by location, by company, things like that. So in that regard, it can be helpful, but recognizing that the data is often skewed kind of one way or the other with those resources. 2 of my favorite, or I guess 3 of my favorites are salary.com. They have a vetting process internally and a lot of the data is reported by employers, not individuals. So I think that's already a little bit more reliable. The Bureau of Labor Statistics posts very reliable data. However, there's less filtering options with that one. So you can't filter by, I think they only list 5 locations. So you could filter by New York, but not Boston, things like that. And I don't think you can filter by years of experience on that one either. And then the one I like the most is what's called salaryexpert.com. It's almost exclusively reported by employers, the data, and then they partner with a research institute to verify and kind of make sure all of their data is reliable. So I find that one to be most reliable in my experience. But kind of to what you were saying, what I tend to do when I'm getting ready for a job search, right? Maybe I'm looking for a couple different types of roles. I kind of first and foremost look across a couple of those sites to get a general sense of what I think the compensation might be. And depending on the scope of the role or the level of the role, maybe I kind of round up or round down, but that gives me kind of a general range of, okay, I think this role is in like the 60 to 70,000 range or something like that. And then talking to recruiters, you can get a little bit more insight into that. Is that high? Is that low? Is that right? As you kind of start talking to them.
So I actually Googled and looked at a lot of these resources recently just for my job in the Boston area, because I really wanted to know what is the real range that we're looking at. And so for my full-time role is technically a compliance officer in the Boston area, which is a high cost city. And if you just look across some of these sites, you get a really large range. I'm looking at 33,000 to 130,000 per year. So how in the world do you navigate that?
Take the average?
In my head, I'm all right, well, I'll just start at 130
Yep.
and we'll negotiate down
No,
from
Katie,
there.
you start at 150. Start at 150 to get to 130.
Yeah. So how do you break a range down like that to get what is probably appropriate for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it depends on the resources you were using too. Were they resources that allowed you to enter things like years of experience? Because so I think if you're not able to enter years of experience, that's where you get that range, right? Like if I entered human resources, there's a huge range of human resources roles. So your compensation when you're 1 year out of college is going to be very different than when you're 20 years into your career. And so I think the big thing at that point is really figuring out the resources that allow you to filter for that years of experience, because that's what's going to differentiate if you're in that 130,000 range or that $30,000 range. And I think that's where using some of these resources that allow you to filter for that might be helpful.
And
okay, now I have a question for the ladies about years of experience. I have a real issue with that because as someone who's I'm 36 years old. I've had multiple careers, right? I've had a very squiggly, non-traditional career whereby I've been working since I graduated from undergrad in 2006, but I haven't necessarily been in my exact field right now that I might be looking for a new job in. So how do you reconcile even that when you're trying to search for the parameters? Because, for example, I have more than 10 years of work experience now, right? There's no question about it. But, how do you unpick what's relevant to that industry versus what's transferable and therefore should be counted? Because I think that actually is a big, as we've been talking about this, Dani, that's a huge portion of identifying that salary band, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it also a big joke that entry-level jobs require 3 to 5 years of experience?
That's the other joke, right? From the other side. It's
from the
entry
other
level,
side,
3 to 5 years. And you're like, F you.
You're
it's not
wait,
that I was not, and look, my first job was working, bussing tables in a restaurant at 14, right? And then making sandwiches. But it's not that I'm trying to say, okay, I'm incorporating those years of experience, right? But I am talking about my post-education combination of internships and work experience. How do you, I'm just curious if you have a take on that.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't incorporate your internships, but I think if there is a way in your mind that you could, in an interview or in a resume, tie one of these jobs to the job you're applying to, then count it. Because I think a lot of times when it comes to career switchers or people who've had kind of a non-linear career, which I think is becoming more and more normal too, I think it's all about marketing. Because maybe you started off in sales and now you're in accounting, but what did you learn in sales that's going to be helpful for accounting? Did you learn attention to detail? Did you learn how to work on teams? There's so many different things that could be helpful in different areas. And so I think if you think there's a way you could tie it into the job you're applying to, count that towards your years of experience when you're, thinking about compensation practices.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice.
Kind of have a question similar to that, but based on education, because a lot of our listeners are coming out of college or in their young 20s, so they might have a master's degree or just a degree that might not be necessarily relevant to the job that they're applying for, or it might be they're overeducated for the job that they're applying for. Are you able to take an entry-level job that you might be overeducated for and negotiate a higher salary there? Or is that usually harder to do?
I think it depends. I've seen it done both ways. So I think that goes back into the company practices a little bit. I used to work at a consulting firm, and the entry level role did not require a graduate degree. But if we had some people come in with a graduate degree that were not yet ready for that next level, we would give them a little bit of a boost in terms of compensation. But it honestly wasn't that much. It was like $2,000 more a year or something like that. But I've seen other places where they don't take that into consideration as much. And there's probably other places where they take that into consideration a lot. And maybe it's a much bigger boost. So I think it comes back to that internal company practices and how much they value that degree for that role too.
Yeah, and that's very arbitrary, isn't it? Because I feel like in our industry of at least in management consulting, everybody loves the MBA, right? But I work in organizational behavior and psychology, right? Like I consult on what people face in terms of change in their organizations and consult clients on that. So my degree, my master's in org psych is actually a perfect fit for what I'm doing. But technically I don't tick the MBA box and therefore may be missing out on some salary
line item
incremental.
Yeah,
right. Even though it's higher ed, I probably paid the same for someone who got an MBA or whatever it might be. It's not the MBA, which actually, I don't know. It's a hard thing when you're looking at the educational background to try to line it up.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the industry in that sense. Because, I mean, there's certain industries where you have to have a graduate degree, right? You can't become a lawyer without a graduate degree. You can't, even like accounting, most people have a graduate degree. But there's other, like I work in HR. I'm currently getting an MBA, so obviously I'm pro MBA. But, I don't need an MBA to succeed in HR. I don't need any graduate degree to succeed in HR. So will I be compensated when I graduate for that degree? I hope so. That's why, but I don't know. Right. So it's because it's not one of those industries or functional areas where it's required for the job.
Yeah. It's not the standard. So I want to shift a little bit because I think, although it's super important to have an idea of what contributes to the number that you're going to ask for, I think that the hardest part is trying to understand when is the right time to bring up salary in your interview process. And, Catherine, you brought up the fact that you won't even apply for a job if it's way off. And I think sometimes I've found myself and I've seen family members apply for jobs, get through the entire interview process, pretty much you're getting the job, and then find out, oh, we're in totally different places on where we thought
we're on different planets.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I got to a point where I'm talking about like tens of thousands of dollars difference. And it's like, you are invested. You clearly want to make this work. How do you know when the right time is to bring it up? And then we'll talk about, what to do.
Yeah. And what to
there
say.
Is that big gap.
Yeah. So I think there's two times when compensation is typically brought up in an interview process. I think the first time should be in that initial phone screen. And so actually my recommendation is if the role seems interesting and aligned with what you're looking for, apply. Worst case scenario, you waste your time in just a phone screen. You don't have to leave your house, like whatever. But that phone screen, most recruiters will bring it up proactively in that phone screen. And they'll say something like, what are your salary expectations? In a lot of states, you can't ask for current salary. Some states you still can. So definitely check on that in your state. So a lot of recruiters are saying, what are your expectations in terms of compensation? And that usually gets brought up kind of at the end of your kind of initial phone screen with the recruiter for that exact reason, to make sure you're generally in the same ballpark when it comes to compensation. So typically I think it will get brought up before you even have to bring it up yourself. But you should be prepared to give a number, because I've seen people try to like skirt around it and be like, well, what's your number? Or, I want to be paid with fair market wages. And that's all fine and good, but that's not the point of why the recruiter's asking it at that point.
It doesn't save anybody time later, does it?
No, right. Yeah. It's better just to have that conversation now. There's ways to balance it out later if you accidentally lowball yourself. So if that's what you're concerned about, you can get that reaction from the recruiter and you kind of know you lowballed yourself. And we can talk about how you kind of fix that later. But definitely have that conversation in the initial phone screen. And if the recruiter does not bring it up, make that one of your questions you ask at the end, and just say, I'm curious from your perspective, I want to make sure we're aligned. What's the range for this role, or what are the salary expectations for this role? And then have them give you an answer if they're not proactively bringing it up to you.
I think that definitely makes sense. And I feel like most of the times that I've seen a huge discrepancy in the number or the offer, let's say, is when the role is completely new. Like they've never hired that position before. And so that's why I think sometimes having the background of the salary research that you've done, you're actually educating them in saying, oh no, the value of my skill set is this. And therefore we need to be talking that your range is off. And I think 90% of the time when you have that conversation, they appreciate it. They're like, oh, okay, we'll go back and
helpful feedback. Yeah,
helpful feedback. We'll go back and see where we can go here. And
Katie, I've told people this sounds like two roles. I've actually said it 100%, before. Like 100%. But that you're showing them that actually you are an expert in your field too, right? Like actually, because I've asked the question, maybe I haven't bluntly said it like, oh, this sounds like two roles. I'm oversimplifying it, but I have said, so, is this an individual contributor role, or is it managing a team? Because that wasn't clear in the job description. And they've been like, oh, well, there's definitely room to manage the team. And it's like, yeah, but this is a job that you need. It's a huge transformation. Like you're going to need at least a team of 4 on that. So I would need to know that there's commitment from leadership today that I could build that team. Otherwise, I'm not signing up for this job, because this sounds like 4 people's or 3 people's jobs instead of 1.
Right. And I've had the same conversation where it's like, I've read the job description and I recognize that is a level above what their title is that they're calling it. And I've actually said that, where it's like, I understand that you think you're hiring an analyst, but actually what you wrote in the job description is a higher level. It might be an associate or a manager.
Right.
And therefore I can fill that, but we need to fix the salary bracket and the title.
And are they open to that?
Yeah.
Well, I do think
I'm going to come in and just change everything. So I hope you're okay with that.
I do think a lot of hiring managers don't know exactly what they want sometimes. Like they have a need on their team and they're like, I need something to fill it. And I think as like HR, we try to guide the managers on how to, based on our experience, but a lot of times we do exactly that. We post the role and we end up getting a lot of feedback from the market that this isn't exactly right. And we need to kind of go back to the drawing board and kind of switch things up. So I do think that is pretty common. So to the extent that there is that feedback, I think definitely give it to the recruiter, because if others are saying that as well, they'll probably go back to the drawing board and tweak the job description a little bit.
That's great to hear you say that, because sometimes I feel like a lone wolf who's being a little bit cynical, but I'm like, but I've done this before. Like there's a part there of trusting yourself and trusting your knowledge and your expertise that we should be encouraging our friends and colleagues and peers to own as well, right? Like trust yourself to really use that and educate that next person. Because to your point, Dani, if 5 people say that, then you're actually doing everybody a service, right?
Yeah,
including the company.
I think if anything, mostly for the company, right? Like if anything, you're helping them, they're getting a sense of this is what the market thinks. Because I think there's a lot of times too, where it's like, okay, well, we're looking for someone with 3 years experience. The people with 1 year of experience or 2 years experience seem underqualified. People with 5 years of experience that are applying seem like underqualified than overqualified, So I think maybe they say like, okay, well, 3 feels right. But then the people they're getting applying, the 3-year doesn't seem right. And they have to adjust their expectations up or down in terms of, what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dani, can we go back to what you should do if you accidentally lowball yourself in that initial conversation? Because that is a fear of mine.
You're like, actually, did I say 80? No,
sorry, when I said
I think my phone
130,
cut
I
out.
meant 130 million.
I think the best way to go about it. So there's 2 times we can talk about compensation, right? There's the initial phone screen where maybe you accidentally lowball yourself. And then the next time you talk about compensation is when you're getting an offer. Yeah. I feel like there's no need to really talk about it again and again in between. And so say you get an offer and it's lower than you want. First, no matter what the offer is, I would always just be gracious, say thank you, and ask for time to think about it. Don't make an emotional decision in the moment, whether you're excited or disappointed. Take time, think about it, even if it's just a couple hours or 24 hours, whatever it might be.
That's
And
so
then
real, Dani. The first time I got a salary offer, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
yes,
It's money. Your first job, especially.
I
You're like,
know.
I'll take anything.
Yeah, I'm like, sure, it's it's
which is,
real.
and it's good to show your enthusiasm, like show I'm so excited about this. Thank you so much. Can I have a day or two to think about it?
Mhm.
Regardless of what it is. And then you have time to compose yourself, think through how you want to start that negotiation, how you want to approach it, things like that. And then I think if you lowball yourself, the best way to go about it is saying, as I learned more through this interview process about the scope and the extent of responsibilities for this role, my expectations were more of X. And you give a higher number. So maybe you initially said 70,000 and said, after learning more about the role and the scope of responsibilities, my expectations were more around 90,000. Do you have any flexibility? And see what they say. So you're not saying what you said before is wrong. It's just, I've just interviewed for whatever, 2 weeks, a month, however long it took. I learned more. It's more of a role than I anticipated during the phone screen. Give me more money,
I like that, because you're basically saying you're not like gaslighting them, like
right.
pretending that you didn't say what you said, right? But you're also not overemphasizing what you said. You're just looking at it today as I've learned more about it, right? Like anything in life, as I've learned more, I now see it's this. That's so smart.
Yeah. And I find that works the best way. And then asking for do you have any, I think in general, when you're negotiating, keeping it open-ended, do you have any flexibility? Because I've seen people posting online about so I need $30,000 more. I think that's damaging sometimes to the relationship. So I think keeping it open-ended, just, do you have any flexibility, or is that a conversation we can talk about? Keeping it kind of open-ended and seeing what they come back with. Maybe they match that number. Maybe they say, we'll get you halfway there and give you a signing bonus. Then they can get creative based on their process. Yeah. And you can still kind of get what you're looking for as well.
And I've even seen in my personal experience, I've even restructured how the salary came out. I think I was offered once kind of a low salary, but with a really high bonus. And I said, it really doesn't work for me to put all of that into a bonus. And I'd really much rather have a higher salary, and kind of reworked a negotiation by just kind of restructuring and being honest about and transparent about what I needed out of it. So we hear all the time, there's always wiggle room in the base salary or the offer. But for example, you just said $20,000 might be more. So what is, quote, wiggle room, and how do you figure out what appropriate wiggle room is? Is 20K ridiculous, or do you go with something more realistic, maybe 2 or 5,000? I don't know. How do you figure that out?
I think it goes back to that market research, right? If the number you did in the market you find is 20,000 more, then you should ask for that, because that's what you're worth. But if you I got a new job back in October, and the initial offer was higher than what I was finding in the market, but I wanted to negotiate solely because women don't negotiate. And I was like, I'm not going to be a statistic.
Yeah, you feel yes, you have to carry the torch for everybody else.
Yeah, so I was I'm going to negotiate. So I got $3,000 more, and I was happy with that because the initial offer was already really good. And I just wanted to negotiate for the sake of it. So, just because I was I need to do this, but I think if the offer is off, if it is not aligned with what you think you should be paid, then ask for that. And maybe they can't give you $20,000. Realistically, they're not going to be able to, but maybe then you can have your counter offers. Maybe they bring you $5,000 more, $10,000 more with a sign-on bonus, a guaranteed year-end bonus, and more PTO, right? Maybe there's other things to sweeten the deal that kind of make up that compensation gap.
Right. I love that. I love that we're still seeing that now. I have a family member who just had that exact scenario happen, which she was market says I'm 60, they're offering 40. I can't do 40. 40 is not a livable wage for me right now in where I live and what we're doing. And it's just not going to happen. But I feel bad asking for what I want. And I was there is no feel bad. There's a livable wage and the standard of the industry, and that's what you ask for. So I'm super glad that you just negotiated, just because you need to negotiate. There's no I hate when I hear women say, "Oh, I feel bad they offered me something." I'm no.
Yeah, they didn't offer. You can be working for it for the next however many months and years. Yeah, no. Absolutely not.
Women in particular are so concerned about ruining the relationship at that stage in general, when with negotiating in general, but particularly in that stage. But I think women in particular forget how much power they have in that moment. Right at that moment, this company has said, we've spent all this time and money interviewing candidates, researching like what we want for this role, and we've decided we want you. You have a ton of power in that moment because they want you. The recruiter wants to close the rec. The team wants to fill their need, and they think you're most qualified for it. So ask for what you deserve because that's actually probably the moment where you have the most power in your entire
Yeah, that's not the time to retreat,
company.
right? That's not the time to back down. That's the
and
time.
So as long as you handle it professionally, there's no concern around hurting the relationship. If you come in and you're rude and demanding, sure, then you could hurt the relationship. But if you're professional and you're just like, hey, my expectations were here, do you have any flexibility? No, employers aren't going to rescind your offer. They're not going to like be upset with you. If anything, most employers expect you to negotiate in some capacity.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like the other thing I would say is, I don't know if you would recommend this, Dani, but I have done it before in other companies when I've had job offers. I've actually asked if I can speak to a peer who works in the organization to get a sense of what all of those extras are, because it's really hard to know like how the 401k matches. I'm assuming you're in a corporate setting, right? How the 401k match is structured because it's different everywhere. It's really hard to understand how the stock options might be paid out and in what cadence or, amount. It's hard to understand how, if you're in a sales role, the commission works. Is it in perpetuity? Is it, and I have found actually when they want to keep you in that really powerful moment, when they want you, they'll put you in touch with someone who will be really honest with you about, yeah, this is what, the 401k match is, 3% on 25 or whatever, like they'll give you the actual numbers that you can then take offline and really mull over, because we talked about this at the start of the interview as well. Medical insurance is a huge gap in jobs. Like I have a friend who just is moving companies now, and she took I think she did get a pay raise, but she had been 4 days a week in her previous company. Now she's going to be 5. So I think it's probably like for like, but she said at the end, she's going to have way more money in her pocket because this company is a UK based company, and they don't, even though they're in the US, they do not believe that people should have to pay a penny for medical insurance, and they do 100% coverage of that. And for her, especially if she has 2 small kids who are in and out of the doctor all the time, there's a lot of medical bills that pile up even when you're fully insured. So she has seen that as a huge savings for her family. And so she didn't feel like she even needed to fight that much harder on the salary because she got a higher salary, but also it's almost like doubled, or it just feels like there's this extra bonus thrown in when you don't have medical costs.
Well, I think that brings up a really good point, which is that oftentimes people, I think, fixate on just their salary when they should be thinking of their total compensation. So if you are getting an offer and they don't send you all the detailed information about the benefits, you absolutely should ask about that. Like as HR, I send that proactively with every offer. I send them their full 30-page packet about all of our benefits, including the perks, including the life insurance, including all the things, because you shouldn't be making a decision on an offer if you don't know how much your health insurance costs or what the 401k matches. Like those are huge components of your total compensation. So either ask like what you did, ask to talk to someone else at the company, or HR should absolutely be able to explain all of that to you. And if you have questions about the logistics of how does the commission work for the sales team or whatever, ask those questions as part of that negotiation process. Like before you ask for more money, be like, hey, I have some questions, because that's absolutely part of your compensation and you should understand how that works.
Totally. And as much as, you should absolutely consider the benefits as part of the offer, the salary offer. Like I get tuition reimbursement for my MBA, which I consider part of my salary. Like that is a dollar amount that even when my
and
MBA
interest saved, right? Like
Exactly.
You're basically getting compound interest.
Right.
It's a crazy way to look at it. I know.
But even after I'm done with my MBA, if that tuition reimbursement goes away for my MBA, I can still use it towards something else, like additional education and something else. And that is still part of my salary. But Dani, you can probably speak to most benefits do tend to be restricted. It's harder to negotiate benefits at a company level. Like Catherine, I know you negotiated vacation days, but is it hard to do something like negotiating your medical insurance costs if that's not really what they do?
So yeah, there's two, I think most benefits are negotiable. I think the two things that are not negotiable are like insurance premiums, because they're just set at a company level. There's no flexibility really there. The premiums are the premiums, and that's set kind of at a high level with their brokers and everything. And then the other one that's hard to negotiate is the 401k match. Because again, that's set kind of at a company-wide level.
Company level.
There's no like flexibility for individuals, but that means there's still so many other benefits you can negotiate. PTO is a great one, tuition reimbursement, stock. As we, come out of the pandemic, maybe you still like working from home. You can have a flexible work schedule. Maybe you don't want to work Fridays, but you want to work 10-hour days, other days, right? Like there's so many things that you can negotiate. So if there's something that you value, look, what you want them to maybe reimburse some of your childcare expenses, maybe they'll do it, right? Like who knows? So I think there's a lot you can negotiate. I think the two things that are just harder to negotiate are the 401k match and insurance.
Yeah, I think it's good to be reminded of that, because we all get so, I don't know if it's just a part of that process when you're looking where the recruiter's giving you numbers and like it always becomes about the base. It's like that song. It's all about the base. But it is like it all kind of comes down to that. And you keep hyper focusing and you forget that there's this whole other world of lifestyle factors that you almost don't realize until they get taken away from you, maybe when you move companies, or they get added for you, even if it's like free snacks in the office, right? Or pizza on Friday, like that's probably $10 that you would have been spending on lunch saved, right? Like these are some of those perks that I think people, you really should. I know you can't get to like the nitty gritty granular detail line item for absolutely everything. But to your point, my husband, when we lived in London, my husband ended up taking a job that was commuting outside of London, and train tickets are very, like the annual train ticket is very expensive there. They also have very good train systems, but he was, increasing his commute and basically, and it would have increased our costs. And he negotiated for them to just buy his annual train pass for him. So that was just done and dusted and not an additional thing that he had to think about, pay for, or even organize. And there was a tax benefit savings to the company too. So it's all, generally speaking,
everybody
you're right.
wins.
Yeah.
Everybody
like there is a
wins.
mutually beneficial way to work these things out.
Yeah. And again, you have so much power in that conversation. If them paying for a train ticket, $200 a month or whatever it costs for them to pay for a train ticket is what's going to get you to accept the offer, then they're going to be like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. But to you, like that 200 is like, oh my God, this extra $200. Like it feels like such a drain, right? And it's such an easy thing to basically like unload.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And again, that's another reason why it's important to not respond to the offer in that moment, because you need time to go back and crunch the numbers with the benefits and say, okay, like, the 401k match is this, and oh, there's no commuting reimbursement. Maybe I want to ask for that, right? Like that gives you that time to like really crunch through all those numbers.
Exactly. And so Dani, I do want to bring this up too, just as a quick reminder to everybody. It is illegal for companies to say you can't talk about your salary, and which case, can you talk about how salary transparency helps women in the workplace?
Yes, yeah, it's a very good point that there's not only is it illegal to prevent employees from talking about their compensation, but employers cannot retaliate against you if you decide to talk about compensation. And
can you say that louder in the back for those in the back? Okay, seriously though, like, and is that a federal thing or a state thing?
It's a federal thing. Yeah.
Okay.
You could, there's no pay transparency law that is a federal thing, but they cannot prevent you from discussing compensation with your coworkers unless like someone like me, right? I'm in HR. That would be an abuse of power if I like told you private compensation data. But if I want to share my personal compensation with you, an employer cannot prevent you from doing that, and they cannot retaliate against you if you do that. So
love it.
Yeah, I definitely think people should be talking about their compensation more and feeling more empowered to do so, because it's your right to do so, one, and two, it's only going to help in terms of pay transparency to know if you're being paid equitably. I have an interesting story. A friend of mine started a startup, and she had 2 employees, a man and a woman. The man negotiated when he started and the woman didn't. And she was like, I don't have a ton of money. He asked for more money. He's getting more money. And I was kind of like, the woman is the founder is a woman. And I was like, why are you paying the woman less? Like, make it equal now. And she was like, it has to do with like our budgeting or whatever. She never asked. And And it just really rung true to me. Like, this is a woman who like is all for women empowerment. And it just came down to the fact that the woman didn't ask. And I think she had no idea. And if she had talked to her male colleague and known that he was making more money than her, and it was, I think, a bit significant amount of more money, then maybe she would have asked, but she didn't know to ask. One, because I think women just don't ask as much. And two, she didn't know she was being paid less. So had she had those conversations with her coworker, maybe she would have actually asked for more money and gotten, an equitable amount of money.
Dani coming in hot with the the reason why we started this podcast. Yeah, like I've asked, out at drinks with some friends from work, I've asked them like, what's your salary? And I'll share mine. And you don't have to give me your exact dollar amount, but like, what's your range? Are you at least above this amount? Because by the way, if you're not, you need to be negotiating. And if you're a lot higher than me, then you need to be helping me with negotiating, right? Like I've had this really blunt conversation also with male colleagues. Every time our annual pay increases come through, there's one guy in particular, we don't even work in the same department anymore and haven't like hung out or worked together in 3 years now, but we still always like text each other, like how much you get, like just to see if we're still on par, right? Because it's just it's a good gut check for you.
Absolutely. I will say the one tricky part of all of this is that employers can pay people differently based on performance. And it's really tricky because depending on the company, they might have a really clear-cut performance process. And you got more money this year, but you got a 5 out of 5 and I was only a 3 out of 5. So like that makes sense. Other companies, it's not as clear-cut, the performance process. And so it makes it a lot more tricky. And so and what biases come into their performance process that might be, racial biases, gender biases, things like that, which then impact pay. So I think it's all a big, very convoluted thing. And so I think absolutely still have those conversations about pay, but also take into account that people might have different background experience. People might be just better performers than another. And that is a warrant of better pay.
Or even have that MBA or whatever, that additional degree or whatever that just automatically started them in a higher pay bracket because that was something the organization really qualifies.
Right. Yeah. Like we aren't talking about, oh, hey, I was talking to John at the bar last night and he makes 10K more than me. Can I have my 10K raise right now?
Right.
You have to go into all of those conversations with the exact same things that we talked about earlier, which is, your research, your experience, your education. Say, this year I contributed X amount to sales and I got my MBA. And now I think I'm worthy of, a 15K raise. And if you end up at 10, that's fine. But like, I think like you cannot go into any of these discussions about salary purely based on just, things outside of your job role. You have to have it tie back to what you're bringing to the table.
Can I ask one more question, Dani, that
Sure.
I know we didn't maybe prep for, so it's okay if you don't have the answer off the top of your head, but we often find it's easier to negotiate salary when you're making a jump. And in fact, people are more willing to women in particular are more willing to negotiate when they're moving companies versus asking for a pay raise in their current existing situation, especially if you're like me and you're like a cog in a wheel of a really large organization. It just feels like such a mechanic, spreadsheet, you fall where you fall process based on exactly those factors you mentioned, where you land in your performance against your peers and all those things. So what would your recommendation be for people who like their job, but want to navigate a pay raise in their current existing situation, how to bring that up with your employer?
Yeah, I do think you're right that it is harder once you're already working there, just based on internal equity and processes and things like that. People tend to be able to make much more money when they jump jobs. And I've found that personally myself. I think the big thing that people make the mistake of is waiting until they're in their performance review meeting and their employer is saying, hey, you're getting a 3% raise this year. Waiting until that conversation, you're too late. So what you need to do is start having that conversation months before you have your conversation with your manager about your compensation. Because at least in my experience, when I worked at a consulting firm, you sat down with your manager in December to have that conversation about compensation and your performance review. You should be having that conversation in that case in August or September, because on the back end from October through December, we're in a bunch of meetings talking about people's performance, talking about their compensation, looking
and
at
budget planning, revenue planning.
Exactly. Like how much money do we have to give out for bonuses this year? Like what's our overall budget for this? And you want your manager to go into those conversations already advocating for you and already knowing your worth and that you're looking for a raise or a more significant raise or a promotion or whatever it might be. If you're waiting till that's all decided, then you're kind of too late. So I think if you don't know how the process works at your company, ask your manager, ask HR. It's not a secret of, oh, well, between these 3 months, we decide compensation, right? I would tell any employee that. So ask your HR what the process is, and then start that conversation with your manager before that. So it could be 6 months before you're actually getting your raise, and just saying, I know we're still months away from this, but I just wanted to bring it up now that I'm hoping for a promotion or I'm hoping for a large raise this year based on X, Y, and Z. Is this something we can talk about? And then go into, what you did that year that went above and beyond, or how your role increased in scope, or whatever it might be. Maybe you got your MBA and your whatever other things that you're using to kind of justify why you deserve that raise or that promotion. Then you can go into that with your manager and ask them, like, do you think this is reasonable? Or do you think that this is something that could happen? And most often your manager will say something like, we'll see, like, I have to look into it. They're not going to necessarily know on the spot. Mm-hmm. But then when they go into those conversations, they can bring that up, saying that that's something you're looking for.
Well, and they know that you're going to be a squeaky wheel, right? Like, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Sorry, Katie.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I literally have my next year's salary conversation the year before at the previous salary conversation. So like in December, I sit down with my manager, they tell me what my raise or bonus is going to be for, the next year. And I already start saying, hey, I want this number to go up 10 or 15,000 next year. So let's talk about, what that needs to look like for me next year, which means that when we're having goals conversations in January, she's already thinking, okay, so what do your how lofty do your goals need to be in order to get that number to go up? And then we talk about that throughout the year. And then it's because you've already like set the tone that this is something that we're working towards, it's so easy to have the conversation throughout the year. It's not, it doesn't become like an awkward thing. And I think that we talk about that with money all the time, right? The more that you're talking about money with your friends, with your peers, the less
awkward.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to approach that conversation too. Is like I want to get to this point, help me get there. Like, what do I need to do to get this raise? Instead of I've already done all these things, so now give me the money. It's like it's kind of going the other way around, and I think that's a great way to approach it.
Yeah, it's super solution focused, Katie. Well done, you.
I like to be proactive, super type A planner over here.
Me too. I feel you.
So Dani, I've really appreciated this conversation today. I think I've learned a lot. I think our listeners will learn a lot. We do like to end our episodes with just one fun question so our audience can get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. We don't send you this question in advance, so.
And there's no right or wrong answer.
There is no right or wrong answer. Our fun question is, what is something that you always skimp on, and what is something you will always splurge on? And I like to give my example of, I love really good, expensive sushi that I will splurge on all the time, but I do not pay delivery fees. I hate them. I can't, the like $3 to $5 to have somebody drive it to me is like not worth it. I will walk like 3 miles to go get really good sushi. It's embarrassing. It's weird. It makes no sense, but those are my usual two.
I have to think. I'm having an easier time thinking about what I splurge on than what
everybody does.
On.
Everyone starts with splurge, I will say.
Splurge is always easy. And they don't have to be related. They can be totally different things. Mine just happen to be weirdly related.
So I think the splurge would be, I know this is kind of random, but getting my eyebrows done. I learned over the years that like I will mess them up, and it is 100% worth paying someone to do it. And I also pay a premium because I go to a place that like consistently does a great job, instead of like going to my like local like place down the street that like is a bit more inconsistent. So I pay a premium to get my eyebrows done because I just feel like gotta have good brows, you know?
You do have good brows,
agree.
by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Your brows shape your entire face. I completely agree.
Yeah. So that is something I splurge on. In terms of skimp on, I'm trying to think. I think Honestly, I think to an extent, shopping, I think I have a lot of self-control when it comes to that. And I try to only buy things if I really feel like I'm needing that thing. Like if I want a pair of white jeans and I don't have any, then I'll shop, or if I need a dress for a specific occasion. But otherwise, I'm trying to have a lot of really like a lot of self-restraint, and because I have so many things. So if I donate things and I want to refill like with other stuff, sure, then I'll go shopping. But I have so much stuff in my closet that like half the time I don't even wear, that I don't need to buy more things just to add more to my closet, because it just accumulates.
Yeah, so like
I
that
love
purposeful adding to your like clothing or stuff collection, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I get that. I totally get
I
that,
love
because
that.
there's a lot of people who shop just for fun. Like,
Yeah. Which I get
They
the
just-
appeal of. It's like, it's a restraint thing. Like I have to
Yeah.
make myself not do it.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like skimping when you have to buy. So it's not
Right.
like you're buying like the shittiest white jeans. I mean, I don't know. I buy shitty white jeans because I know I'm gonna
because you're
spill
gonna mess
something
them
on
up.
them. Yeah, like I'm gonna wear those to a barbecue and get barbecue sauce all over them. So I get shitty white jeans, but like it doesn't mean that you're like completely skimping on the quality. Just waiting to replenish.
And then,
Yeah,
or you have
exactly.
two small kids like me, and you will never see white jeans again.
That's fair.